Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great works of English literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're bringing you the second episode in a 5-part adaptation of A Dream of Armageddon by H.G. Wells. In this story, a man is sharing his wild dreams with a stranger on a train in Victorian England. In these dreams that are not like dreams, he seems to inhabit the life of a great politician in some far future time, a politician who has forsaken power for the sake of a young woman he loves, turning his back on a world of increasingly dangerous political turmoil. As we return to our story, the dreamer on the train continues his account of the first night he seemed to fall bodily into the future life of another man.
My pale, emaciated traveling companion's eyes seemed to stare right through me as he recounted his strange dream, speaking as like a man in a trance.
I remember how I sprang to my feet and joined her at the balcony. She put a white hand upon my shoulder and pointed toward great masses of limestone, flushing, as it were, into life. I looked, but first I noted the sunlight on her face caressing the lines of her cheek and neck. How can I describe to you that scene we had before us? We were at Capri.
I have been there. I have clambered up Monte Solaro and drunk Ferro Capri. Muddy stuff like cider, at the summit.
Ah, then perhaps you can tell me. You will know if this was indeed Capri. I have never been there. Let me describe it as it was in the dream. We were in a little room, one of a vast multitude of little rooms, very cool and sunny, hollowed out of the limestone of a sort of cape very high above the sea. The whole island, you know, was one enormous hotel, complex beyond explaining, and on the other side there were miles of floating hotels and huge floating stages to which the flying machines came. They called it a pleasure city. Of course, there was none of that in your time. Rather, I should say, is none of that now. Of course, now, yes. Well, from this room of ours one could see east and west. Eastward was a great cliff, 1,000 feet high perhaps, coldly gray except for one bright edge of gold, and beyond it the Isle of the Sirens, and a falling coast that faded and passed into the hot sunrise. And when one turned to the west, distinct and near was a little bay, a little beach still in shadow. And out of that shadow rose Solaro, like a beauty throned, and the white moon was floating behind her in the sky. And before us, from east to west, stretched the many-tinted sea all dotted with little sailing boats. Just below us was a rock with an arch worn through it. The blue seawater broke to green and foam all around the rock, and a galley came gliding out of the arch.
I know that rock. I was nearly drowned there. It's called the Faraglioni.
I Faraglioni. Yes, she called it that. Well, that is the first thing I remember of the first dream I had, that little shaded room and the beautiful air and sky and that dear lady of mine, and how we sat and talked in half whispers to one another, not because there was anyone to hear, but because there was still such a freshness between us that our thoughts were a little frightened, I think, to find themselves at last in words, and so they came softly. After a time, we became hungry and we went from our apartment, walking down a strange passage with a moving floor, until we came to a great breakfast room with a fountain and music. A pleasant and joyful place it was, with its sunlight and splashing and the murmur of plucked strings. And we sat and ate and smiled at one another, and I would not return the fixed look of a man who watched us from a table nearby. And, after dining, we went on to the dancing hall. But I cannot describe that hall. The place was enormous, larger than any building you have ever seen. And in one place there was the old gate of Capri, caught into the wall of the gallery high overhead. Light girders, stems, and threads of gold burst from the pillars like fountains, streamed like an aurora across the roof, and interlaced like conjuring tricks. All about the great circle for the dancers there were beautiful figures, strange dragons, and intricate and wonderful sculptures fixed with lights. The place was inundated with artificial light that shamed the newborn day. And as we went through the crowd, the people turned and looked at me, for my name and face were known all throughout the world, along with the story of how I had thrown aside pride and struggle to come to this place. And they looked at the lady beside me as well, though half the story of how at last she had come to me was unknown or mistold. And few of the men who were there, I know, would judge me an unhappy man, in spite of all the shame and dishonor that had come upon my name. The air was full of music, full of harmonious scents, full of the rhythm of beautiful motions. Thousands of beautiful people swarmed about the hall, crowded the galleries, sat in myriad recesses. They were dressed in splendid colors and crowned with flowers. Thousands danced on the great circle beneath the white images of the ancient gods. We too danced, not the dreary monotonies of your day, of this time, I mean, but dances that were beautiful, intoxicating, and even now I could see my lady dancing joyously. The music was different. I cannot describe it, but it was infinitely richer and more varied than any music I have ever heard awake. And then, it was when we had done dancing, the man came to speak with me. He was a lean, resolute man, very soberly dressed for that place. He came and touched me and spoke to me so that I was forced to listen, and he asked that he might speak to me for a time alone. No, I said, I have no secrets from this lady. What do you want to tell me? And he asked me if I had heard of a great and avenging declaration that Evesham had made. Now, Evesham had always been the man just behind myself in the leadership of that great party in the north. He was a forcible, hard, and tactless man, and only I had been able to soften and control him. It was because of him, I think, that the others had been so dismayed at my retreat from politics. When the man had told me what Evesham had been saying, I must confess that even I was struck by the reckless folly in the wild and threatening words he had used, and the messenger they had sent not only told me about Evesham's speech, but went on to ask my advice and to point out how badly I was needed. While he talked, my lady sat a little forward and watched his face and mine. My old habits of scheming and organizing reasserted themselves. I could even see myself suddenly returning to the north, and all the dramatic effect of it. All that this man said witnessed to the disorder of the party, but not its damage. I could go back stronger than I had come, and then I thought of my lady. You see, how can I tell you? There were certain peculiarities of our relationship. As things are, I need not tell you about that, which would render her presence with me impossible. I would have to leave her. Indeed, I would have to renounce her clearly and openly if I was to return to the north. And the man knew that, even as he talked to her and to me, knew it as well as she did, that my steps to duty were, first, separation, then abandonment. At the touch of that thought, my dream of a return was shattered. I turned on the man suddenly, as he was imagining his eloquence was gaining ground with me. Why cannot you leave me alone? I have done with these things. I have ceased to be anything but a private man. Yes, he answered. But have you thought? This talk of war, these reckless challenges, these wild aggressions. No, I cried. I won't hear you. I took count of all those things. I weighed them, and I have come away. He looked from me to where the lady sat regarding us. War, he said, as if he were speaking to himself, and then turned slowly from me and walked away. I stood, caught in the whirl of thoughts the messenger had set in motion. I heard my lady's voice. Dear, she said, but if they need you. She did not finish her sentence. She let it rest there. I turned to her sweet face, and the balance of my mood swayed and reeled. They want me only to do the things they dare not do themselves, I said. If they distrust Evesham, they must settle it with him themselves. She looked at me doubtfully. But war, she said. My dear one, said I, you must not trouble over these things. There will be no war. Certainly there will be no war. The age of wars is past. Trust me to know the justice of this case. They have no right upon me, dearest, and no one has a right upon me. I have been free to choose my life, and I have chosen this. But war, she said. I sat down beside her. I put my arm around her and took her hand in mine. I set myself to fill her mind with pleasant things again. I lied to her, and in lying to her, I lied also to myself. And she was only too ready to believe me, only too ready to forget. Very soon the shadow had gone again, and we were hastening to our bathing place in the Grotto del Bovo Marino, where it was our custom to bathe every day. We swam and splashed one another, and in that buoyant water I seemed to become something lighter and stronger than a man. And at last we came out dripping and rejoicing and raced among the rocks. And then I put on a dry bathing dress, and we sat to bask in the sun, and presently I nodded, resting my head against her knee, and she put her hand upon my hair and stroked it softly, and I dozed. And, behold, as it were with the snapping of the string of a violin, I was awakening, and I was in my own bed in Liverpool, in the life of today. The man in the dream, the great future statesman who has chosen love over power, has decided to ignore the rising threat of demagoguery and war fervor threatening his former nation and the world, preferring instead to remain in leisurely retirement with his lover in a strange future version of Capri, a lovely Italian island. What might be the cost of this choice, and why has the 19th century dreamer who somehow came to experience this life been left so badly shaken by the memory of it? Join us again tomorrow evening as we begin to unravel these mysteries here on BeFM Drama.